Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Zena Hall. I'm a positive mindset and confidence coach. And today I'm talking about identity, the beliefs that we have, and our mindset. And I'm absolutely delighted to be in this beautiful studio this afternoon with my wonderful friend Natalie. And we're going to explore these topics together because talking about real life situations and the things that we really believe personally can really highlight for other people, I hope, where we are and what we're doing. So I want you to sit back and enjoy watching this video about identity, mindset, and our beliefs and the behaviours that follow. So I'm going to be quiet just for a moment. I'm going to ask Natalie a little question to start with, just to warm us up. So, Natalie, tell me a little bit and our viewers a bit about yourself and who you are.
This is actually a really interesting question. And when you kindly reached out and asked me to record this with you and sent over the sort of list of questions that we'd be sort of touching on, this was the one that piqued my interest the most. Because if you'd asked me this question a year, maybe 2 years ago, I think my answer would have been very different to what it is today. Um, 2 years ago, if you'd asked me that question, I would have said, "Hi, I'm Natalie. I'm a mum of three. I'm a wife. I'm an accountant and business owner," and probably have stopped there. But if you were to ask me that question now, with the journey that I've been on over the last sort of year to 2 years, I am, of course, all of those things, but I'm also Natalie. I am self-driven, quietly ambitious, don't take myself too seriously. Um, I love with all of my heart, um, but I haven't always believed that in myself, actually, or haven't acknowledged that because I was everything to everybody else. And that has been my focus over the last 20 years of raising three children and being married and building a career, that I did lose myself for a period of time. Um, and I recognized it about 2 years ago. And I knew I had to make some changes because I knew my children were going to outgrow the home and they wasn't going to need mum anymore. Um, but I knew I had to find myself and I had to understand who I was as a person because I really genuinely thought that I didn't know who I was. Didn't recognize myself anymore. Um, so a couple of things that I did, if that's okay for
Yeah,
me to expand on
no,
that.
carry on. It's absolutely lovely.
I probably, like many women of our age or my
Hmm.
age, you start to doubt yourself.
Yeah.
You lose confidence. I know I was definitely entering burnout. I was constantly in fight and flight mode. And what I now, when I look back, what I realized was I was eating the wrong things, which
Mhm.
meant I had lack of confidence in how I looked and how I felt. It had an impact on my energy levels, which meant that I had no energy at all to work out and go to the gym. Um, the sort of Friday, Saturday sort of glass of wine turned into midweek glass of wine, so all of those things that we know is not good for us. So I decided to make some changes. Um, I stopped drinking alcohol 2 years
Mhm.
ago, although I have just come back from skiing and maybe a little bit of après. Um, but I stopped drinking alcohol. I focused far more on working out. I started running, couched 5K, leading to sort of a half marathon. And just be getting back in tune with my body because I felt like the alcohol, diet masked how I was feeling, masked my understanding of my emotions and what was actually regulating me.
Yeah.
And by stripping all of that away, I then sort of learned to understand my body, understand my mind, and understand actually who I am as a person. I hadn't changed who I am as a person. I'm
No.
still the same person, but I just lost that. And the journey of the last 2 years actually has been really positive, certainly for me. I'm hoping everybody else feels the same way. But I just feel a lot calmer. I feel a lot more content in myself. I feel probably healthiest and fittest I've been in a long, long time. And that's got to be a reflection of surely how I'm coming across, in terms of my relationship with my husband, my relationship with my children. how I'm able to focus on, my work and just be the best version of myself, I guess. So that was a really long-winded way of answering that
No.
question. But it's why I really like the question, because it took me a moment to sort of reflect on the last 2 years.
And that's absolutely wonderful. And so I'm
That's a lot to unpack.
no, no, no. It is and it isn't. And the reason I'm pausing is because if you'd asked me that same question 2 years ago, I would have said what you've just said.
Okay.
Because if you take my journey back, we would start 2 years before you did.
Yeah.
So I took a break from alcohol in the January of 2022, having been on a longer journey further back than that. So my journey started back in 2018, 2019, when I did a self-development course, when I suddenly realized that I had got lost.
Yeah.
And at that point, though I think our children are probably just that little bit at different ages,
Yeah.
aren't they? And so I'd found that bit of where the hell has Zena gone? Where's the person who traveled around the world for
Yeah.
2.5 years at the age of 20 without a care in the world? I'd lost all of those, lost those bits completely. I was having a wonderful life. I have the most amazing family,
Yeah.
just like you, in that basis of like, you've got everything that
Which I
you
ever wish for.
thought. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But actually, you get to a point where there's a bit of you that's got lost, and refinding that is lovely. So, really funny that our journeys are sort of like, I'm sort of seeing myself 2 years ago.
But it's
To
so reassuring, because actually when you're going through that, even before and during, and even now, you do feel like actually you're on your own. And I
Yeah, you
know
can feel like
people
that.
do speak about things quite openly. We're now in a society where people speak about their
Yeah,
emotions and how they're feeling far more than they ever did, which is amazing. But I still don't think that ever takes away from the fact that you still feel like you're going through that
yeah,
alone and nobody would ever understand it. Um, which is fascinating, because I knew the choices I was making and the reason and why, and I know where I've got to as a result of it. But this is the first time I've actually said it out loud.
okay. And how do you feel saying it out loud?
I think actually now I'm ready to talk about it,
Okay.
whereas I don't think previously I was. And I think that was because, I don't know, is it a bit of shame? Possibly.
Yeah. See?
Um, or that people would judge me for feeling the way I did, because very similar to what you were just saying, I have everything and more that I could ever wish
Mhm.
for. But the start of that journey, I know that I was in a place where actually I wasn't happy. Not because anything was going wrong, or, relationships were absolutely fine. But I know in myself I wasn't happy because I didn't know who I was and I felt lost. So I think that possible bit of shame, maybe lack of understand or perception of lack of
Mhm.
understanding, has meant that I haven't actually said that out loud.
It's interesting. So the word perception
Mhm.
stands out to me when
Yeah.
you say that, because our self-perception is not necessarily how other people see us. So we look in the mirror, and there's a beautiful image that's out there all the time. It's a little kitten, stripy kitten, looking in the mirror. And what's reflected is a lion. But what they see,
Yeah.
or what everybody else sees, is this timid little kitten. And we all see things totally differently.
Different.
You will experience this conversation very differently to me. And everybody watching it will also experience it in a completely unique way. And something we say will completely bypass one person, and somebody else might hear something and think, oh, that's me. But everyone's perception is different. So, what do you think the difference is now?
Because I know I'm content.
Okay.
I know who I am. I know that everything that I've worked on over the last few years, I obviously recognized it a couple of years ago that something had to
Hmm.
change. And because of I know the person I am, I'm self-driven, I'm quietly ambitious, all the things I said at the start. And I've always been super independent. But I knew I had to do that for myself.
Okay.
Not just for myself, actually, but for my family.
Hmm.
Um, it's only right that they get the best version of me most of the time.
Yeah.
We are only human. There's going to be occasions where they don't. But I think now I'm at the stage where actually I know the changes I've made. I can see and feel the positive impact of those
Yeah. Yeah.
changes. And I want that to continue. So I speak that out into the existence openly. Then it's out there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to
Absolutely.
hopefully stay there. So I think that's the difference now.
Okay.
Whereas previously I didn't have that confidence. I didn't have that desire to want to share it.
Okay.
So I think there's two elements to that.
Yeah.
I am quite a private person.
Okay.
I do play things quite close to my chest in terms of my emotions and how I feel. And I think that's probably, again, I've done a lot of reflection as to some of my personality traits and sometimes my reactions to things. And I know a lot of that stems actually from childhood,
Hmm.
um, which is great. I've got that ability to go back and reflect on things and have that understanding and
Yeah.
awareness, which I may not have been able to do previously.
Yeah. I mean, when we change our lives, when we stop, reflect, step back, we give ourselves time
And grace.
to think. Absolutely, and be able to understand ourselves is an absolute gift. And if I could give that to everybody, I certainly would. That space to be able to just stop, reflect, think about, are you who you're supposed to be? Because I most certainly am not. And eh, my email signature says to be, I want to help people to become the person they need to be, because I believe that I wasn't, because I'd got lost. And I definitely hear that in what you're saying, Natalie, definitely. And it's really interesting what we say and how we identify. So if we're talking about our identity and our mindset and those beliefs, so you've used the phrase there, I'm, I'm, I am quite a few times.
Yeah.
So I am quietly ambitious is quite a nice one. I'd quite like to unpack.
Okay.
Um, you also said something else about being, I can't remember the other one you said.
Self-driven,
Yeah,
maybe.
self-driven. But also, I think there was a little bit I could hear there
Yeah.
about being private.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Which comes from being quietly ambitious.
Okay.
And I think because, as I was just explaining, I'm not somebody to really put myself out there. This is quite a big deal that I'm doing this. I'm not somebody to put myself out there.
Okay.
I'm not somebody who, at every milestone and achievement, which I have amazing achievements, I don't shout about it from the rooftops.
Okay.
I am a successful individual in terms of my life and my career, and I absolutely own that, and I've worked hard for it. But again, I've done that quietly. I don't climb over people. I don't shout from the rooftops about this is where I'm going to be and this is what I'm achieving. I don't think that that's necessary. It's certainly not for me anyway. And which is why I wouldn't have actually claimed myself as being an ambitious person. But I must be right to be where I am.
Yeah.
Um, so therefore, my statement is I am quietly ambitious.
Okay. It's really interesting because those two words are quite jarring
Mm,
in some ways. They
yeah,
challenge each other.
yeah,
Quietly ambitious. So if you took the quietly out,
yes.
what does that do?
That for me gives me the impression that yes, I'm a go-getter, but I will stamp on anybody to get what I want. And that's
Okay.
not me.
Okay.
That isn't me. You know, in an ideal world, yes, I'd like to get, what I work for. I'd like to bring everybody else along with me too. Um, yeah, I,
Yeah, no, no, it's lovely, isn't it? Because and you're very secure in that, and you know
absolutely.
but
Yeah,
it comes from somewhere.
it
So it,
does.
so,
Yeah,
so
yes,
you,
it does.
yeah, so it
Yeah,
comes from somewhere. So somewhere along your journey, along all of our journeys, we pack a bag,
yes. Many.
and it starts as a child. You've
Yeah.
already said that. You've talked about that. So as a child, we start building this picture of ourselves, that perspective, and we put into our bags, our backpacks, whatever we want to do. Somebody says something, somebody tells us to be quiet. I was told I was too sensitive as a
Mm.
child. I was always told to be quiet, had to be quiet. I wasn't allowed to laugh the way that laugh. I have a loud laugh, but it's
But it's your
mine.
laugh.
And, but we pack all
Yeah.
the stuff that other people tell us
Yeah.
into our bags, and somewhere along the lines, we put those things in and we don't bother taking them out.
Yeah.
It's a bit like me picking up my handbag this morning and thinking about the fact that actually, oh, that's where my 2 lipsticks are. Oh, and there are 3 lipsticks in there.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily go through our bags every time we go out.
No.
But if we sit and we stop and we take everything out, we suddenly realize that we can unpack quite a lot from the bag that we're carrying. And that bag that we carry from a childhood through to adulthood is our beliefs, the rules that we live by, the words, the phrases that we use, the things that we identify with. So
I know what you're going to say.
somewhere along the line, you've been told that actually you
Yeah.
need to be quiet
Yeah. And I
in
actually,
some
you're
way.
absolutely right. You've hit the nail on the head. There have been occasions where people have made comments about, I don't know, I guess maybe it comes from jealousy, possibly,
Hmm.
because have created an amazing life, come from a broken home. My parents divorced when I was 6 or 7, from a very working class background. I was the first member of my family to attend university and to graduate. Um, so I think there definitely has probably been occasions where there may have been some comments, maybe from a little bit of jealousy in terms of what I've created and what I've
Yeah.
built, which has then led me to retreat in terms of what I share, in terms of what I'm doing,
Yeah.
and the visibility of my life. And I think actually this is really off the cuff now, but this is quite deep. I think there's also something at the back of my head as well, because I'm a woman of colour,
Hmm.
and a woman of colour that um, born and raised in Cardiff, that we're far now multicultural than perhaps we were when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Certainly the community and the schools that I was in at the time, that historically Black women have been seen to be quite loud and aggressive. Um, so yeah, we've just
Yeah.
unpacked quite a bit there actually, which is quite interesting because again, it's not something I've really said out loud and connected the dots,
No.
but that's just landed and it's resonated. And I think I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's bags there.
And these the things we put them in our bags and we don't recognize them and we don't see them, but they form that picture of who we are, and it's the bits that we carry around. Um, I was going to talk about parts of me, but actually it doesn't feel very relevant at this point. But that journey of where we come from. I'm a farmer's daughter, lived in the middle of nowhere. So for me, there's so much around that because my dad had a Range Rover. It was actually a really practical vehicle that he used on the farm.
Yeah.
But we used to ask him to drop us off around the corner from school because nobody else had a Range Rover. But we didn't have a Range Rover because there was loads of money.
It was because it was a practical vehicle given.
Exactly. But that wasn't the perception everywhere else. So but we don't understand that. As children, we just accept our normal life that we are given and that we're brought into. We don't choose where we grow up,
No.
who our parents are, or anything else. They do their best with what they have because they don't have a rule book either.
Yep.
And their rule book is written for them from their childhood and what they've brought with them. And they do their best. I'm hoping that as we go through and our girls and our children have the ability to know themselves more, understand where their identity comes from, understand their minds. I mean, both my girls are doing psychology in one way or another. And that gives them a
A
place to
really
have
good basis.
learned a lot of stuff. But actually, The understanding ourselves as humans, what makes us tick, where we come from, why does that impact us? Why does a belief that we've carried in that bag impact the behavior that we have? So being that quietly ambitious woman and thinking about what you've just talked about and where you've been brought up and your background and your family, where does that where does that take you forward? So if you've identified that, where does that quiet ambition, I'm not going to say need to shift,
Mm.
because if you're happy where it is, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
But if you were wanting to move it forward, what would that look like?
So the quiet element would stay. I
Okay.
don't feel like I need to shout from the rooftops. I don't need to have public displays of, my achievements or anything like that. I think it's more internal,
Okay.
as in, and again, I think this is just the background of, where I come from. I've done quite a bit of reading on this, and it's quite a common thing that there's a lot of self doubt in
Mhm.
terms of, do I actually deserve where I am and what I've got? And just that second guessing of yourself. So I think if I could remove that element of it, as in,
Okay.
okay, yeah, I've achieved all of these things I've achieved. Actually, should I have, So if I could remove that part, I think I'd be happy.
Okay. That's interesting, isn't it? Could you remove that bit? So there are lots of different ways that
Mm.
you can change our mindsets. So everything that we do, everything that we think can be changed, because what we think is not the truth.
Yeah.
It's simply a thought that we're having. And I can't remember the statistics, but they are ridiculous on the number of thoughts that we actually have on a daily
Well,
basis. I think there's like over 100,000. And that's if we're talking about somebody who is not somebody with sort of neurodiverse um, element to them. And for those people, there's even more thoughts, and that can be really, really difficult. But generally, a lot of people have somewhere around 100,000 thoughts. They come, they go, but they simply are thoughts. And all the things that we believe about ourselves that aren't necessarily true, they're simply what we think. And, and thoughts aren't the truth. They're not the
yeah,
truth. And neuroscience tells us so many things now, so much more about the brain and what's going on. But we can simply change our thoughts. But we have to first be aware of them.
yes,
And going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of that, like that journey of those 2 years.
yeah,
2 years ago or 4 years ago for me, I wasn't in a place to be aware of what was going on for
no,
me. Um, just because I was busy getting through life,
on the
eating
hamster wheel.
rubbish on a hamster wheel, exactly. And it takes that pause, it takes that step away, and it takes that want to
Yes,
grow and change and develop. And not everybody wants to do that. And that's absolutely wonderful, as long as they're happy and they're thriving in what they're doing. But if they want to change, or there's something that they're feeling frustrated with, or they don't recognize, then that's the time to pause and then notice what's going on. So
agree.
yeah, it's yeah, I'm not sure where we can go to next with our
Yeah, it's
conversation.
quite a bit to unpack.
Yeah. I'm sitting here thinking about identity. So if you were going to sum up
Yes.
Natalie now,
Yes.
after this conversation, has anything shifted or changed?
I think so. I think just by having this conversation,
Mm,
actually, even before we've pressed record, just the willingness to have this open conversation, because I knew the type of things that were going to be discussed really and
yeah,
what was going to come out. I would never have done that. I would never have put that out there. But now I feel like I'm more in control and just more confident, in terms of who I am and the journey that I've been on. So I'm quite happy to put that out there. Hopefully it helps somebody.
absolutely. And that's the one thing. It's one of the massive drivers to me for doing my YouTube channel, having my newsletter, being a nuisance on Instagram every day, because if you can see yourself, and as you said, as a woman of color, and I hope that that's the
Yeah.
right thing for me to say, um, if we can see ourselves in somebody else, then we know that we're not alone, and we can use that information in a way that suits us, because everyone's thoughts and what people say and everything that comes out of somebody's mouth is simply their understanding. Going back to their lens, their vision of what they see the world, or the words that they're using. But what you've shared is really powerful. It could be really powerful for somebody. And I hope that that will be something that some people can take away.
Me too.
So, shall we wrap up there?
Yeah.
Okay. So, if I was going to wrap up the conversation, we've been on a real journey.
Yes.
I think we've both discovered that actually we're
We're
not
very
alone.
no, and we're very similar in terms of, what we've been through and
Absolutely.
how we tackled that journey too.
Yeah. And mine was very much a lone journey at the beginning. Um, I certainly, when I stopped drinking 4 years ago, I certainly didn't shout it from the rooftops. But in January, I was part of the Alcohol Change UK um, Dry January campaign.
It's amazing.
And if we don't tell our stories of the average person who's having a glass of wine on a Saturday, Friday, Sunday, possibly a Thursday night, then other people who may be thinking that's something that it's like, oh, that's not really serving me anymore. It doesn't align with who I want to be or anything like that. Middle lane drinking isn't an issue for so many people, but actually it can tip over into something else. So that's really nice that we've been able to talk about that actually,
Yeah.
because that's really important for people to know. But our mindsets have shifted. You're now sitting there having this
Reflection.
conversation, which is wonderful because that might help somebody. And if that's your mindset can shift and it's just like, actually, yeah, I can share that. And that is a mindset shift
Massively.
because you've touched on words like shame and, beingly quietly ambitious. You know, it's okay to be those things. It's okay to feel quiet. It's okay to be ambitious. I mean, we all have the things that we don't do because of the things that we can hold ourselves back from, but actually building a bit of evidence of, you know what, I can do hard things.
Absolutely.
So, with that, I think we'll probably wrap it up. So, if there's anything that you have heard in this that you want to reach out to me and chat about, or just share with somebody else that you think that this video would help, I'd love that. And give us a thumbs up and get in touch, because if we can talk about these things, then anybody can. And it's all about how you identify, how your mindset shifts. Your actions are built on what you carry and the person you are, that you can always change if you want to. So, Natalie, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I've absolutely loved it. I don't think I've stopped smiling since the moment I walked into the studio. So, it's been really nice.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Been an absolute. Thank you.